So quite frequently, I listen to messages preached by Charles Haddon Spurgeon. Of course, he lived in the late 1800s, and so there are no actual recordings of his voice, but there would be somebody who sat in the audience and would write down word for word what he said. And then very often they would publish those things in the newspaper, those messages, for other people who weren't there to be able to read. And recently, some man has taken upon himself to read all of those messages into record and record them, and so you can listen to them. It's not Spurgeon's voice, but it is the same. It's the same guy who reads them. I really enjoy listening to the messages. Spurgeon was a crafter of words, we might say, and I just did really enjoy his speaking. Well, this week I was listening to one of his messages, and he said a phrase. It wasn't really part of the message. It was just as he said it in passing. And once he said it, I don't even know what he said after that. Because that phrase kept rolling over and over and over again in my mind. And the next thing I know, my pen was making notations, and a whole message came out of that one phrase that I heard Spurgeon say this week. So the phrase we'll use as our title this morning, and that phrase is, the fullness of Christ for the emptiness of man. That is quite a phrase. The fullness of Christ for the emptiness of man. Let's pray, and we'll try to work through that thought. Father, we rejoice that you are our God, and we are so thankful that you brought us here today. But what is it if we are here and you are not? What help is it if we come and open your word and your Spirit does not teach it? What are we benefited if we walk away exactly as we were before? Father, it is not in your nature to waste time and opportunity, and we ask that you would override our nature that would do that, and that you would do your work here this morning. Lord, give us clarity of mind and thought, and I pray that your Spirit would lead us where we need to go, each individually, to the spot where we need to go. We ask this in the precious name of Christ. Amen. This morning I want to explore that thought using 5 questions. And instead of allowing yourself to be spoon-fed this morning, try to force your mind into gear. Ask the Spirit of God to answer the questions in your mind before I give you the answers. I'll try to give you a few moments to try to get the answer in your mind to these 5 questions. You know, Spurgeon, if you ever listen to him if you ever heard him preach, the 2 words getting together here, if you ever heard him speak much, you'll know that very often in the beginning of his message, he would give you his entire outline right off the bat. And then he would work through it. Now, these are not Spurgeon's questions. This was not his message. But since he would give them ahead of time, let me give you the 5 questions so that you can be mulling them over as we go. 5 questions from the phrase that Spurgeon put together, the fullness of Christ for the emptiness of man. Number 1 question, how full is Christ? Now, question number 2, how empty is man? Question number 3, what is the correlation between those two? Question number 4, how do we access the fullness of Christ? And number 5, can there ever be a lack? Now, I hope that your mind is already working on those things, but those are our 5 questions. And if we can get those 5 questions answered, not merely in our head, but in our heart, we would have done a good day's work today. So let's wade right in. Number 1, how full is Christ? I want you to take a few moments and answer that question in your own mind. Try to force Scripture to come to mind. Try to get truth to come to your brain. Don't just get spoon-fed this morning. How full is Christ? won't ask you to answer that out loud. I want you to answer that in your own mind. How full is Christ? Well, let's look at our passage here, Colossians 1:19. Colossians 1:19, for it pleased the Father that in him, talking about Christ, should all fullness dwell. Turn one page to Colossians 2, verse number 9. Talking of Christ again, Colossians 2:9. For in him dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. Two very familiar verses. I hope that one of those verses popped into your brain. When I asked you how full is Christ, I hope that one of those verses popped in before I gave them to you. Jesus Christ is God made flesh. The Bible's very clear on that. Jesus Christ is God made flesh. So how full is God? It's a good question. When Daniel and Lene got married in Colorado, has that been 2 years ago now? A year and a half ago. A year and a half ago. When they got married, after the wedding, they had 2 vehicles. And they had to bring their stuff from, Lene's stuff was all in Colorado. They had to get that to Wisconsin. They had 2 vehicles out there. So after the wedding, they were packing their vehicles, and we stopped over to help them. Daniel comes from a long line of packers. And so he was packing this car. And he was sticking stuff into every nook and cranny. It was a joy to watch. Because you would see him pick up one of Lene's things. And you could, of course, I know him like a book, because it's like watching my own life. He'd pick this thing up. He would calculate its value. You could see him doing it at his head. He would calculate its value and calculate its size. And he wouldn't like the calculation. You know what I'm saying? Why are we taking this is the question. It's not worth that much money. Why are we taking this? Then he would look at Lene and he'd put it in the car. And I thought, this boy has a chance of staying married. He packed and he packed and he packed and he packed every nook and cranny to where you had to kind of lean on the trunk, to get it shut, kind of an idea. He had that car packed to the gills. It was full, both cars. But was it really? If you'd have taken all that stuff back out, you could have rearranged a few of the boxes, combined a few of the boxes. You could have said, that's trash, why are we even taking that? And you could have gotten more stuff into those vehicles. Do you understand? They were full, but they weren't really full. Now, is this how God is? When it says, in him dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead, is there some empty space? Is God truly full? This is a serious, legitimate question. Let me ask you, is there more love that could be added to God if there was room? If we could move something out, would there be more love that could be added? If he changed his attributes a little bit, could he get a little more power? Is there another attribute that he could add if there was just room in him? Is there another attribute that he could add? Is there an attribute that's just taking up space unnecessarily? If he studied a little bit more, could God add to his knowledge? Is his grace limited just because there isn't enough capacity? Now, I'm guessing that to each one of those questions, your mind was balking. Like, what kind of a question is that? You can't add any love to God. He can't get any more power. He doesn't need to study to get more knowledge. He already has all of that. God is infinite in every direction. He is perfect in every attribute. He doesn't change because he needs nothing. Nothing could be added, nothing could be taken away. If you had perfect wisdom and you could hand design God, you could not improve on God already, because he is perfect in every way. He is complete. That is how full Christ is. How full is Christ? Completely full. In him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. Okay, that's number one. Question number two. How empty is man? The fullness of Christ for the emptiness of man. Answer that question in your mind. How empty is man? How empty is man? Well, to begin with, man was made from nothing, right? He was made from the dust of the ground. So he's not made of some amazing material to begin with. Remember your periodic table of elements from high school? How many remember the periodic? Do they still teach that? The periodic table of elements. The bane of high school science class. Scientists have broken down and did an analysis of the human body. I looked this up on the internet last night. They've done an analysis on the human body, and they figured out that if you broke a man down to his basic elements, and you bought that, he's worth $4.50. So for the price of a 20-ounce pop and a king-size candy bar at Casey's, or one Big Mac at McDonald's, that's what you're worth in elements. Okay, that's not a very stellar start, okay? Man was not worth very much to begin with. We have a tendency to get a pretty big view of ourselves. When we consider the works of art, the buildings we've built, the accomplishments we've made, we remember we used to keep the records. I don't know if they still put the book out, the Guinness Book of World Records. Do they still make that book? So they keep track of all the world records, all the amazing things that man has done. He got so amazing that he designed a rocket that would take him from this planet and land him on the moon. That is one small step for mankind, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And who got him back here to the planet? Ooh. We were big stuff, were we not? But it wasn't long after that there was a wrinkle in their plan. They sent out Voyager 1 not long after that. And I've told you this before. If you want to know how small you are, get up Google Images and type in pale blue dot. Voyager 1, as it was leaving our solar system, it was sending pictures back, and it sent one last picture. I was watching this on a documentary, and I think it was a lady that was there that night that got the picture came in, and she's staring at this picture, and she cannot figure out what is this dot on this picture that it just sent out. There's one pixel on this whole page, and there's a dot there. What is that dot? And she realized that one dot on that picture is planet Earth. And it just rocked the whole of society at the time. Why? Because every single person that's ever lived, every single thought that's ever been thought, every human deed, every human accomplishment is on that one single dot. Now, think about how small that dot is, and now think about what part of you do you play in that dot. We're like, whoa. It was this kind of thought that David was thinking in Psalms chapter number 8 when he says, the heavens declare, when I consider the heavens and the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man that thou visitest him? How empty is man? Well, he started as nothing. But what has he done since then? He has completely corrupted himself. All we like sheep have gone astray. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. The fact of the matter is, Luke 17:10 tells us, so likewise ye, when ye shall have done all those things which commanded you, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done that which was our duty to do. The fact of the matter is, if we obeyed every command of God perfectly, we would just break even. But since we never obey perfectly, whatever we do is always in the negative column. It's like the old sales joke. Do you remember that old sales joke that goes something like this? Well, we're losing $25 per sale, but we make it up in volume. How many negative $25 sales do you have to have before it becomes positive? You see, a negative is a negative is a negative is a negative. How empty is man? Well, he started at 0, and it has been negative. Every single act since then has been negative. How empty is man? Totally and completely empty. How full is Christ? How empty is man? Question number 3. What is the correlation between the two? What is the correlation between the two? What is the relationship between them? What is the relationship between the fullness of Christ and the emptiness of man? Let's pursue our mind here a little bit. What is the relationship? Does it make any difference to you that Warren Buffett and Bill Gates are gazillionaires? Does that make any difference to you? Does it make any difference to them that you had trouble making your car payment this month? It doesn't make any difference to them. Okay? They are rich and you're not rich. And the two have nothing to do with each other, right? It's not that one didn't cause the other. There's no relationship between the two facts. That's the way it is. They have money and you don't. That's just the way it is. Okay? There is no relationship between the two. So, why is the relationship, what is the correlation between the fullness of Christ and the emptiness of man? We'll look at our verses here. Colossians 2, verse number 9. In him dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. And what's the next verse? And ye are complete in him, which is the head of all principality and power. Now turn back 2 books to the book of Ephesians. Got to get to Galatians, you're too far. Ephesians, chapter number 1. I won't take you back to John 1, but in John 1:14 it tells us that Christ, in him dwelleth all the full, he was full of grace and truth in John 1:14. In verse number 16 it says, and of his fullness have we all received, and grace for grace. Ephesians 1, chapter number 1, verse number 22 says, and hath put all things under his feet, and gave him to be the head over all things to the church, which is his body, the fullness of him that filleth all in all. Look at chapter number 3, verse number 19. And to know the love of Christ, which passeth knowledge, that ye might be filled with all the fullness of God. Look at chapter number 4, verse number 13. Till we all come in unity of faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God unto the perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. What is the correlation between the fullness of Christ and the emptiness of man? What is the correlation between the fullness of Christ and the emptiness of man? That fullness is your supply. You have no wisdom, but he has all the wisdom that you need. You are empty of love, but he is your supply. We have no strength, but his strength is made perfect in weakness. We are totally and undeniably empty, but we are complete in him. He is our fullness. Talked about it a few weeks ago. Christ is everything that you need for every need that you have. How full is Christ? How empty is man? What is the correlation between the two? Question number 4. How do we access the fullness of Christ? How do we access the fullness of Christ? Take you back to your childhood. Do you remember candy machines and gumball machines and vending machines and video games? When you were a kid, do you remember those? Remember the old pop machines? You guys won't remember these at all. The old glass bottle pop machines. Can you hear it in your mind as you pull that bottle out of that thing? Can you hear that noise in your head as you pull that down the hill? And I think it might actually even still be sitting there. They had one just over the hill. They had a pop machine down there. Remember the video games when you were a kid? The stand-up arcade games? They would play, if you watched them, they would play through part of the game. The machine itself would play the game, and then it would go to the title screen, and then it would tell you all the scoring worked and all the different things. You go, and then it would play the game again, and you'd stand there and watch this whole thing progress over and over and over again. Do you remember the big gumball machines that had those big plastic eggs in them? And in the front, they had all the different possibility of the prizes inside that machine. And you'd peer down in there to see which one is loaded up in the gumball machine, or you try to look through the little slot on the bottom to see if I put my money in there, what's going to be there. Do you remember the gumball machines? All penny gumball machines. Anybody remember penny gumball machines? They had that little slot that you put it down, that it went like that. Do you remember those? Those were the good old days. Now, I saw a candy bar for $2.39 the other day. I about had a heart attack. I can remember when they were a quarter and they raised it to 30 cents. I had to sit down and strike right there in the store. You remember those vending machines? I mean, everything a kid could want was there. All the sugar, all the pop, all the entertainment, all the toys, all of it there. What was the problem? What's the problem? There's that little slot in the front. And that slot stood between you and your wildest dreams. Because that slot took money and you had none in your pocket. Do you remember you have one nickel or maybe a quarter? Do you remember the debate as you looked across these machines? Do I put it in the video game and use it all up, or do I change it into pennies and get 25 different pieces of gum? The debate as a kid. It's a tough life, was it not? There was plenty of supply. There's supply of everything you could ever want, but the problem was nothing in your jeans. And that coin slot, you could only afford just so much out of there, and that stopped you from your wildest dreams. You know what? Too many of God's people have that idea about him. He is all of our supply, but this must be some kind of a slot out in front that we have got to insert and merit what he wants to give. And we know that the supply is all there, but we look at ourselves and say, we haven't got enough here. We don't have enough to put in order to get that back out so that we can have the supply that we need. Somehow we have put a coin slot in the idea. We have to put in our merit. We have to earn his love. We have to deserve his grace. We have to pay for his wisdom. Where we got this idea, I have no idea. But it just isn't true. Romans 8:32. He that spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? If we lack anything at this moment, if we are empty today, it is not because we do not have access to a complete supply. We are complete in him, and it is available free of charge. There is no coin slot in order to get the supply from the Lord. How full is Christ? How empty is man? What is the correlation between the two? And how do we access the fullness of Christ? And number 5, can there ever be a lack? Can there ever be a lack? Does the supply ever run out? Can there ever be a lack? At home, we're not very conservative with water. We run what we need to run. We do what we need to do, and we're not really, really careful with our water. We could be a lot more careful. And at this moment, with just the 3 of us, I think we're using about 3,000 gallons a month. If you break that down, that's 1,000 gallons a month per person, which means that I personally would use around 12,000 gallons per year. See the quick math there? All you teenagers, mathematicians. Which means that in 10 years, I use 120,000 gallons of water. And in 100 years, I use 1.2 million gallons of water. You got this keeping up here? Good. 1.2 million gallons of water. If I lived to be 100, that's how much water I would use. And that's excessive. I could easily get by with a lot less than that. Okay, do you understand that? So 1.2 million gallons of water in 100 years. When we were in Panama on the cruise this last fall, if you've never seen Panama, that's worth seeing if you ever get down there. It is an interesting deal. It consists of some ginormous lakes there, and then locks on either side, on the Atlantic side and on the Pacific side. There's 2 sets of locks. The ships come in, and it raises them up 86 feet to go, and so the lakes, in other words, sit 86 feet above the ocean level. And so these series of locks raise the ship up. And you have to think about the ship on how large it is. The ship would be as wide as the church is basically long, and if you put 25 of the churches side by side, that would be about the length. And then if you stack 13 churches on top of each other, that would be about the height. So think about 25 wide, 13 high. The ships are 1,000 feet long and a little over 100 feet wide, and 13, 14 stories tall. And they're ginormous. The ships come in, and there's no pumps on the water. There's none of that. It's all gravity fed from that lake. And to lift up one of those ships through that lock to take in one transit, 52 million gallons of fresh water. 52 million gallons of fresh water. And the water comes into those locks so fast that you can actually see the ship when you're standing out there. You can actually see the ship going up. A ship that size is like that. 52 million gallons of water. Now, suppose you live right next to the Panama Canal. Do you suppose that they ever post a sign that says, please don't do your laundry this week? We're running short on water. They use 52 million gallons of water, and they have 2 locks on either side and 2 on the other side. So they're running 4 ships at a time. It takes 52 million gallons for each one of those. Okay, and that's an hour, okay? And they have so many ships, they are lined up. You have to make reservations, and they go day and night. And it costs for a container ship $1.2 million to go through. Try to do the math on that. That's a money-making deal right there. Anyway, I use 1.2 million gallons in my lifetime. They're using 52 million gallons per hour per lock. Are they going to put up a sign and say, sorry, we can't supply you today. We're just a little short. I'm 3 minutes worth of water, less than that, in my lifetime. You understand? The supply is there. Do you honestly think that your little problem taps the supply of God? Do you think your ginormous problem even scratches the surface of God's supply? Is there somehow that you could possibly ever lack the supply, that just wouldn't be enough there for you? That God's grace just couldn't be enough, His love just couldn't be enough, His power cannot be enough to do what needs to be done? Do you honestly believe that your God is so small that His supply might run short on you? Can there be any lack? This is like, I was thinking about this morning. I heard a couple of weeks ago that when the Twin Towers came down, 1 million fluorescent bulbs broke. I don't know the veracity of that statement, but it sounds legitimate, like it could be logical. 1 million fluorescent bulbs broke. Think of the power that would be running into a major building like that. Now, do you think your cell phone could ever blow the breaker? You're trying to charge your cell phone? You think you could ever blow the breaker? Think of the lines that must run into these places. And you get your cell phone in there and I think, I don't know if there's going to be enough power. Look, my friends, God is infinite. And when we think about the fullness of Christ, it is the fullness of Godhead bodily, and we are complete in Him, and therefore there is no chance of there ever being a lack. There is no chance. How full is Christ? How empty is man? What is the correlation between the two? How do we access the fullness of Christ? Can there ever be a lack? My friend, the fullness of Christ meets the need of the emptiness of man.